Black Ships Before Troy, the Iliad and the Odyssey, Act 3 by Rosemary Sutcliff. The important vocabulary words for this act are sprawl, sit or lie with arms and legs spread. Spindle is used to make yarn. Coo is a quiet murmuring sound, like the bird, the dove, makes a coo sound. Centaur, a mythical half-horse, half-man creature. Hall, a long, narrow room. Court, official place for judge or king. A maiden is a young single woman. Quarters is a place where one stays or your home. Famous is well known. Sacred is holy to a religion. Are limits or borders or boundaries. Tracks are narrow trails or paths. Bay is a curved beach like the Chesapeake Bay. And a lyre is a review word. It is a stringed musical instrument. Kind of looks like a harp. Even beyond the farthest bounds of Greece, the fame of Helen's beauty traveled until it came at last to Troy, as Aphrodite had known that it would. And Paris no sooner heard of her than he determined to go and see for himself if she was indeed as fair as men said. Oenone wept and begged him to stay with her, but he paid no heed, and his feet came no more up the track to her woodland cave. If Paris wanted a thing, then he must have it, so he begged a ship from his father, and he and his companions set out. All the length of the Aegean Sea was before them, and often the winds blew them from their true course. But they came at last to their landfall, and ran the ship up on the beach, and climbed the long hill tracks that brought them to the fortress palace of King Menelaus. Slaves met them as they met all strangers in the outer court, and led them in to wash off the salt and the dust of their long journey. And presently, clad in fresh clothes, they were standing before the king in his great hall, where the fire burned on the raised hearth in the center, and the king's favorite hounds lay sprawled about his feet. "Welcome to you, strangers," said Menelaus. "Tell me now who you are and where you come from, and what brings you to my hall." "I am a king's son, Paris by name, from Troy, far across the sea," Paris told him, "and I come because I wish to see distant places, and the fame of Menelaus has reached our shores as a great king and a generous host to strangers." "Sit then and eat, for you must be weary from such far traveling," said the king. When they were seated, meat and fruit and wine in golden cups were brought and set before them. While they ate and talked with their host, telling the adventures of their journey, Helen, the queen, came in from the women's quarters. Two of her maidens followed her, one carrying her baby daughter, and the other carrying her ivory spindle and distaff laden with wool of the deepest purple color. She sat on the far side of the fire, the women's side, and began to spin. As she spun wool yarn, she listened to the stranger's tales of his journeying. And remember that a spindle and a distaff are used to twist or spin wool threads into yarn to make clothing. Most Greeks wore bleached white-gray wool clothing. Only rich people could afford wool dyed in a color, and purple or dark blue colors were considered to be just for royalty. For many days, Paris and his companions remained the guests of King Menelaus, and soon it was not enough for Paris to look at the queen. Poor Oenone was quite forgotten, and he did not know how to go away, leaving Helen of the fair cheeks behind. So the days went by, and the prince and the queen walked together through the cool olive gardens and under the white-flowered almond trees of the palace. He sat at her feet while she spun her purple wool yarn, and he played the lyre and sang songs of his own people to her. Then one day the king rode out hunting. Paris made an excuse not to ride with him, and he and his companions remained behind. Then they were alone together, walking in the silvery shade of the olive trees, while his companions and her maidens amused themselves at a little distance. Paris told the queen that it was for sight of her that he had come so far, and that now that he had seen her, he loved her to his heart's core, and he could not live without her. "You should not have told me this," said Helen, "for I am another man's wife. Because you have told me, it will be the worse for me when you go away and must leave me behind." "Honey sweet," said Paris, "my ship is on the beach. Come with me now while the king, your husband, is away from home. For we belong together, you and I, like two snips of a grapevine sprung from the same stock." They talked together on and on through the hot noon with the crickets chirping, he urging and she holding back. But he was Paris who always got the things he wanted, and deep within her heart wanted the same thing. Her marriage had been an arranged affair rather than a love match. She was still young, while her husband had gray in his hair and in his beard. In the end she left her lord, her babe, and her honor. Followed by his companions with the maidens weeping and pleading behind them, Paris led her down the mountain paths and passes to his ship waiting on the seashore. So Paris had the bride that Aphrodite had promised him, and from that came all of the sorrows that followed. And this is the end of Act 3.